Hello, everyone. It's Friday night, time for bourbon and scary stories. Hope some of you are there to listen. So, do you all have your bourbon? I'm going to go get my bourbon right now. I'm at my house in the Highlands. I don't know what you're going to drink, but I'm going to have Evan Williams tonight. So you can see me pour. I'm going to use a fancy snifter tonight. And even though it's warm outside, I lit a fire, so atmosphere. This is probably the last fire of the season, I'd say. So I'm settling in. I actually took a shower and did my hair today. First time in a week. So I'm gonna put my phone up here and hopefully you're all ready. So let me get started. So cheers. So in case you don't know anything about me and my stories, I used to live in O Louisville, which is one of the largest historic preservation districts in the country. And in 1999, I ended up buying an old house on 3rd Street. That was the old Millionaire's Row. And I lived there for 8 years. Right before I moved in, the previous owner told me there was a ghost that came with the house. And I don't really believe in ghosts, so I didn't take any of her warnings seriously, but I moved in, and sure enough, all these strange things she warned me about started happening. So long story short, the first year I was in the house, I had a lot of what people would call paranormal encounters. Other people in the house had experiences as well. And that kind of led me to talk to more people in the neighborhood and kind of discover there was a haunted neighborhood. You know, Old Louisville is one of the largest historic preservation districts in the country. There's 45 square blocks of old houses, roughly 1,400 houses and mansions in all. They've been around, you know, since the 1880s up through 1900, the bulk of them. So they've seen a lot of history. And I was always amazed that the city wasn't doing more to promote the neighborhood. So I was an out-of-towner. I kind of saw the neighborhood with fresh eyes. And that's what got me into writing stories about the neighborhood. I realized you don't need to believe in ghosts to enjoy a good ghost story. So ghost stories, they involve architecture and history, real-life characters. And for me, it was a way to kind of do my part and put Old Louisville on the map. So what happened was in 2005, I wrote my very first book called Ghosts of Old Louisville, and it's still selling today. A couple of years ago, University Press of Kentucky acquired the rights and they reprinted all of these. But after this one, it was very popular. People came to me with more stories. So I wrote the second in the series, which was called Phantoms of Old Louisville. And a lot of you might know the famous Pink Palace there. And a couple of years later, I wrote the third in the series, which was Haunts of Old Louisville. So those three collections of ghost stories is kind of what got me started. At the time, I was a food writer. And I was writing cookbooks and restaurant reviews and cooking columns as well. And so in between writing cookbooks, I ended up collecting these ghost stories. So these first three ghost books, that's kind of what launched me into writing about the neighborhood. But this one came out like 2009. So over the years, what happened is people got in touch with me. They said, oh, that was my grandmother's house she wrote about on 6th Street, or here's a picture of the house she wrote about on St. James Court, or my grandmother lived on Ormsby Avenue and she used to see a Civil War soldier on her back stairs. And some of them came with new information. They came with documentation of some of the stories I had written about and some of the things I had not been able to substantiate. They had kind of photographic proof and archival proof. Sometimes I got corrected, you know, the years were wrong or the people I had written about, the names were wrong and things like that. But what happened is then just a few years ago, in 2014, I took those three books and I took the most popular stories from each of those three books, I edited and updated them, and I put them in one book. So this is kind of the the best of collection. It's called True Ghost Stories and Eerie Legends from America's Most Haunted Neighborhood. And that's one of the nicknames that Old Louisville has earned over the years. They say you can't go more than half a block without there being a reportedly haunted house. So most of the best stories, most of the popular stories I've written about are in this book. And people early on, they were reading my books. They wanted to see the places they were reading about. So that's how I got into giving tours down in Old Louisville, as a way to get people out on the streets, to promote the neighborhood, help with revitalization, get people down there, make money for different neighborhood associations. And it's been great. Going on 16 years now, I've been doing these tours in some form or other. People come from all over the world. The New York Times wrote us up not too long ago. And I love when people come down in the neighborhood and check out the houses and hear our spooky stories. Unfortunately, with what's been going on with the virus situation, we can't do tours anymore, so I need to practice and keep telling my stories. So tonight, I'm going to start the series of several ghost stories from this book, and ghost stories that we hear on the tour. And I'm going to just tell you some of my favorite stories from this book. Once we run out of stories from this book, which will probably take a week or two, then I think I might start reading from my very last book. It's called Voodoo Days at La Casa Fabulosa. So on the cover here, you can see the house where I used to live, and it was called Widmer House. It was built in the 1890s for a tobacco man that lived on 3rd Street. And that's where I lived for 8 years, and that's kind of what got me really interested in the neighborhood. And I think the next story, or the third story I tell, will be the story of Widmer House, how I got involved in all of this. But this was a really fun book. What I discovered is, yes, my house supposedly had some ghosts, but the more interesting things in the neighborhood were the actual real-life people I encountered on a daily basis. So I'll just kind of read this as a story. I think we'll read chapter by chapter and let you see what you find out about Old Louisville. All right? So everyone ready? You got your bourbon ready to start? Who's drinking what for bourbon? I see someone's got Blanton's. What else do we have tonight? Anyone doing Evan Williams? No? Frank, what are you drinking tonight? No? Well, I got my bourbon. That's all that counts. Okay, so cheers. I'm going to get ready. I'm going to tell our first story. Okay. So the story I'm going to tell tonight is the story of Annie Whipple. It's one of my favorite stories in the neighborhood. And just so you know, most of the stories I've written down in book form are stories that are allegedly true. These are encounters that people have passed on. I've interviewed people, and they've told me about things they've seen and done. When I talk to someone and their story seems interesting, sometimes, people are a little, I don't believe them, put them that way, and so I don't pursue those stories. But the people whose stories pique my curiosity and the ones who I think that their stories have some merit, I'll do some research, and 9 times out of 10, as I'm digging into the old deeds of the property and finding out who lived there and finding their occupations and digging through old newspaper articles and stuff, 9 times out of 10, I'll find something in the past that puts a face on, the modern day hauntings, and that's what I think is really fascinating. So for the most part, these stories have been corroborated. They've been substantiated in some form or other. There's 1 or 2 that are legends, and legends aren't true. There's often a kernel of truth to them, but for the most part, most of my stories are stories that, I've taken people at their word. I believe what they told me. I've done research, and I found things in the past that kind of helped me cobble the stories and put them together. So for the most part, the stories I write about in my books are stories that weren't around before I cobbled them together. A lot of times it came from different sources. So there's a lot of research, a lot of work putting these stories together. So I'm really happy when people listen to my stories and they like my stories. So getting back to Annie Whipple, this takes place at a beautiful old house at the corner of 4th and Park in Old Louisville. And if you're in the area, or if you're from Louisville, you might know this place. I'm gonna hold it up. It's the old Russell Houston Mansion. It was built in the 1880s, a beautiful red brick Queen Anne house. Has 3 floors like most of the houses in Old Louisville. And if you can believe it, they're going to tear it down in the 70s when the preservation movement was just coming into its own in the neighborhood. And back then, it was all about tearing everything old down. We had this thing called urban renewal, tear all the old places down, put up new things. Fortunately, in Old Louisville, there were a lot of preservation-minded people. They banded together. They ended up saving this house and the neighbor houses, and that's what led to the kind of preservation drive that put Old Louisville on the map. It gained national recognition as a historic preservation district. And from that point forward, 1975 on, you couldn't tear these places down. So this house, the old Russell Houston Mansion, is a landmark for a number of reasons, not least of which is the fact that they were going to tear it down, but it was saved. It's a bed and breakfast today. Used to be the inn at Central Park, but recently owners Herb and Gail Warren changed it. It's got a bourbon theme, so it's called the Louisville Bourbon Inn, and it's one of my favorite bed and breakfasts. There's 3 or 4 bed and breakfasts on 4th Street. The inn at Central Park, Central Park Inn, owned by Bob and Eva Wessels. The DuPont Mansion, those are some of my favorite ones, and they're all like in one block of the other. And as far as I know, they all have some kind of ghost there. So. But as far as the ghosts on 4th Street, this is one of my favorite ones. So they say the old Russell Houston Mansion is haunted by the ghost of Annie Whipple. And Annie Whipple is always described as a schoolmarmly kind of specter. There's a beautiful staircase. You go into the foyer of the today's Louisville Bourbon Inn. There's a curving staircase that goes up to the 2nd floor. And guests who stayed at the bed and breakfast, previous owners of the mansion, said many nights and sometimes during the day, you see the shadowy form of a woman with a high-waisted skirt, a high collared blouse with a cameo brooch at her neck, long sleeves, kind of running up and down the stairs at all hours of the night. And according to the local legend and lore, they say it's the ghost of Annie Whipple, who was a kind of a governess, used to work in the house. So the house was built for Judge Russell Houston. He was one of the first presidents of the Louisville-Nashville Railway. He was also a judge and a lawyer. He was quite wealthy. And the story is Annie Whipple was a mysterious figure. She showed up in the late 1870s from New England. And they said she had been the wife of a whaling captain. She lived in Maine, and he had been lost at sea. So she came to Louisville, which kind of back in the 1800s, Louisville was seen as the gateway to the Wild West. We were a rough and tumble river town, and this is, one of the last stops that you would make before you headed out to Western Territories. So she came here because she heard there was a lot of opportunity. She had been a teacher, and so she knew, there would be some kind of job for her. She ended up not traveling on as she had hoped to the far states in the West. She ended up taking a job as a governess with the family of Judge Russell Houston. And she was in charge of the children, taking care of them. She was their nursemaid, but she was also their tutor. She was the one who taught them at home. And supposedly the Houston family had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. And back then, Louisville had a kind of a dubious nickname. Eventually, in the early 1900s, the late 1800s, Louisville was known as a city of beautiful homes because of our beautiful mansions and the palatial grounds. People from the East Coast came to Louisville in the 1800s for the Southern Exposition, and they were bowled away by these wonderful houses, these comfortable abodes that earned us the nickname as a city of beautiful houses. So when we got that nickname, people were very happy because up until then, Louisville was known as the graveyard of the West. In the early 1800s, Louisville was known as a bloody state. It was a state where people were violent. They were always fighting. And then the saying was, because of the location on the Ohio River, Louisville was often prone to higher fatality rates in the different disease epidemics, typhus, yellow fever, cholera, things like that. And if you live in this area, you know that allergies are always a problem. They think that had something to do with it. But it was during one of these epidemics that the children of the family became sick. And Annie Whipple, being their governess, she was in charge of nursing them back to health. So she took care of the children. The two older children, the two boys, they say rallied, they were fine. But the youngest girl, someone they said was named Sarah, she wasn't responding. And doctors came, specialists came, and they talked to the mother and father and said, you know, you better call a priest or something. It's not looking too good. Your little girl's probably not going to make it. Well, Annie Whipple, you know, she couldn't accept this, so she didn't want to give up on the child, so she sat by the child's bedside day and night. She nursed her the best she could, tried to make her comfortable, you know, soothed her. And at night, she would sit there and she would read the local newspapers. Back then, spiritualism was all the rage in Victorian America. They were having seances as parlor games. Louisville, back in the day, in case you didn't know this, for a number of decades was considered the Gypsy Headquarters of the United States. We had lots of gypsies in Louisville. And there were fortune tellers who would travel. There were people who would conduct seances in these houses. Annie Whipple, they say, had been raised kind of in a strict household. She didn't believe in these things. She didn't subscribe to these notions. So she didn't really take this seriously. But as the little girl started to wither away, Annie Whipple became desperate. She thought, you know, what am I going to do to help this little girl? So she would read the newspapers trying to look for, you know, pharmacies and cures where maybe there's something that the doctors and the family hadn't thought about that could help this little girl. Well, one day she was sitting at the bedside. She read this article about a local doctor. His name was Dr. Anderson, and he was known to be able to cure any kind of malady. The thing is, he had very unorthodox ways of handling illnesses, and it earned him a dubious nickname as the Witch Doctor. And in my book, I actually have some articles about Dr. Anderson and what they thought of him. This is when he was curing a woman across the river in New Albany, and he actually lived across the river back then. And so Annie decided that was her only hope. She would contact Dr. Anderson, and he surely would have something that would help this little girl rally. So the next day, she hitched up her horse and carriage and drove across the one bridge that there was going across the Ohio River to southern Indiana back then, and she went to Dr. Anderson's house in Jeffersonville. As she pulled around the corner and parked in front of his house, she was kind of dismayed to find that there was black bunting and crepe all across his front porch and around his front door. And if anyone knows about, you know, old-fashioned traditions, black crepe and black bunting means what? It's a sign of mourning, so it turns out someone had died. Actually, Dr. Anderson had died the night before, maybe as she was reading that article. So she turned the carriage around, drove back to the family mansion on 4th Street, and she was despondent. She didn't know what else she could do. That was her only hope for helping this little girl. Well, that night, as she sat by the girl's bedside, she started reading more about the spiritualist updates. The Louisville Times back then, they said every day they had like a spiritualist column talking about the latest trends. And she read this article about something that was very popular back then. It was called automatic writing. And the thought was you could communicate with spirits by inviting them to kind of possess your body and use your hands and write messages through you. And all of a sudden, Annie Whipple had an idea. You know, she had been raised to be kind of suspicious of these things, but she was so desperate she thought she'd do anything to help this little girl. So she decided she would try to contact the spirit of Dr. Anderson because he had just died, you know, he was freshly dead. Maybe she could still get him while he had some power, and from beyond the grave, she could get some assistance from him. And just around the corner, there was a famous tree back then. It was called the Witches tree. And actually, you can see it today. Actually, I might tell that on a different story. But the Witches Tree was a place where local witches used to meet, and voodoo people used to meet. And there was a voodoo, they called it hoodoo back then actually, priestess by the name of Josephine, who used to meet there, and she'd consult her clients. And so she met Josephine the next night by the night of a full moon. And she told her what she wanted to do. She said, someone had just died and I need to get in touch with him because he's the only one that can help me. And of course, Josephine, being a practitioner of the dark arts, she knew exactly what this was. So she took some money from Annie Whipple and said, okay, well, this is what you need to do if you want to communicate with the spirit. She gave her a pad of paper, a satchel with kind of a magic dust in it, if you will, a white gardenia candle, and then a parchment with a prayer that was scrawled out over it. She said, you go and you sit at your writing table, you lay out the paper, you sprinkle it with this dust, you light the candle, incant this prayer, and you ask the spirit to come and commune with you. And if the spirit is so inclined, they will come and help you. So Annie, she took all these tools, she rushed back, she rushed up the stairs. Her room was right next to the little girl's at the top of the stairs. And she took out the paper, sat it on her writing desk. She sprinkled it with the powder, lit the candle, said this prayer, and she ended the prayer by saying, Dr. Anderson, I know you just died. I know you're still around, but I need your help. There's a little girl here who really needs my help. I love her like she's one of my own, and you're the only one who can help her. Please reach from the beyond and tell me what I can do to save this little girl. And she said she kind of went limp. She fell into a trance. And things went black, but she woke up a couple minutes later and she saw that the paper in front of her had handwriting on it. And of course it was in a hand that was different from her own. Well, the next morning, she was at breakfast with the rest of the family, and there was a young cousin staying with the family from Philadelphia, and he was at medical school, and he saw she had brought down this piece of paper, and he saw this writing. He said, well, why do you have this? And he picked it up and looked at it. Why do you have this prescription? And Annie said, is that what it is? Because she couldn't read it. He said, yes, this is in Latin. It's for a medication. And Annie Whipple all of a sudden thought, okay, Dr. Anderson is trying to help me. He's giving me medicine to help the little girl. So she said to the young cousin, is this something that could help, young Sarah upstairs in her state? And the cousin said, well, I'm not, 100% sure. I'm not a doctor yet, but this might be able to help. So Annie Whipple, she grabbed the piece of paper with the writing. She ran to the next pharmacist, and she had this prescription filled. And as she was talking to the pharmacist, the chemist, they called it back then, she asked if this would help someone with this kind of illness the little girl had. And he said, well, it might. I haven't heard of it, but it can't really hurt her. And so she rushed back with this medication, administered it to the little girl, and Sarah, the little girl, rallied. Color returned to her cheek. She opened her eyes, and she was lucid after days of being, comatose. So Annie Whipple was really heartened. She thought, oh, this is really going to help the little girl. And she sat with the little girl for the rest of the day. But by the end of the night, the little girl took a turn for the worse, and she fell back into a deep slumber. The doctors came, and they kind of shook their heads. They said, she's not going to be around for much longer. So, of course, Annie Whipple didn't want to give up. That night, she sat at her writing desk. She pulled out the paper and sprinkled it with the powder, lit the candle, said the prayer, and did the same thing she had done the night before. And again, she said, Dr. Anderson, I still need your help. The medicine you gave me helped the little girl, but I think it's not enough, or I need something else because she's back to being unconscious. And she fell into a slumber. She came to several minutes later, and there was handwriting, on this piece of paper she had laid out in front of her. Well, the next morning she rushed to the pharmacist without consulting anyone and had the prescription filled. It was a different medication this time. Came back, gave it to the little girl, and the same thing happened. Sarah rallied, her eyes cleared, she opened them. She was lucid, she could see what was going on around her. Color returned to her cheeks, and the family was kind of heartened. They thought, well, maybe she is going to make a recovery. But the same thing happened. By the end of the day, the little girl had taken a turn for the worse, and this time she fell into a deep slumber, and the doctors came again, and they said, there's just no hope for her. She's not going to make it. Well, the same thing happened. Annie didn't want to give up. She pulled out her paper, sat at her desk, sprinkled it with the powder, lit the candle, said the prayer, and the same thing. Dr. Anderson, I need your help. And she fell into a trance. She came to several minutes later, and this time there was writing on the paper again. She noticed that the writing this time was a little different. It wasn't the same as the previous 2 nights. And so she ran to the pharmacist the next morning, had the prescription filled without consulting anyone, came back, gave the medicine to the little girl, and this time, instead of rallying, little Sarah began frothing at the mouth. She started convulsing, and she started having seizures. They called the doctor, and the doctor kind of banished Annie Whipple from the room because he saw what she had given the child, and he said to Annie, he said, "Why would you give her something like this? This is something a child can't have. This is something that's going to kill her." And Annie retreated to her room. She was kind of crestfallen. She felt horrible because the family sent for the priest. The doctor said that by the end of the day, the little girl would be dead. And of course, Annie was devastated. She sat at her desk. The day passed. That night, darkness fell, and the family was kind of holding vigil around the girl's bedside because the doctor said by daybreak she would most likely be dead. Well, sitting in her room all by herself in the room next door, Annie was at her desk, and she saw the paper, and she saw the satchel with the kind of magic dust. She saw the candle and the parchment with the prayer that she had been incanting the previous nights, and she kind of got mad. She couldn't understand why Dr. Anderson didn't help her. And so she stared at the paper, and she started to get mad, and she started to curse. And of course, when you're dealing with spirits, when you're dealing with the beyond, you never curse the spirits. And she said, "Dr. Anderson, damn you, you were supposed to help me, and now it's all for naught. The little girl's going to die. The priest is here, the doctor's here, and they say by the time the sun comes up in the morning, she'll be dead. Why'd you do this to me?" And all of a sudden, Annie Whipple said she felt kind of a rumble in the floorboards, and the lights on the wall started to flicker, and they flickered on and they flickered off, and all of a sudden she fell into a deep trance. But this time she didn't go completely unconscious as she had gone before. This time she was kind of half awake, and she said it was like she had no control over her body. She could see things, she was aware of what was going on around her, but she had no control over her limbs. It was like she was a marionette. Someone was operating her arms and her legs. And she said all of a sudden one of her hands grabbed the pen that was on the desk, the other grabbed a piece of paper from the pad she had been giving, and with the one hand she started slashing at the pad of paper. She began kind of stabbing at the wood at the desk, and she started chipping and marring the surface and shredding the paper. And for 2-3 minutes she just went on like this, going crazy, just massacring everything on the desktop. And then all of a sudden things went quiet. Her hands went still, and then one of her hands that had the pen lifted up in the air. The other hand grabbed one little scrap of paper that hadn't been totally destroyed, and the other hand quickly wrote across it, "You fool, I'm not Dr. Anderson." And Annie Whipple fell into a slump on the floor. And in the next room, they heard her collapse. They ran in to find her there, unconscious on the floor next to her bed. They put her to bed, and in the hours between that time and daybreak, Annie came to several times, and she told them what had happened and how she had tried to contact the spirit of Dr. Anderson. And the thing is, by the time the sun came up, Annie Whipple was dead. The good thing is, the little girl recovered. She totally made a recovery. She survived after that. And what they found out, or what they think happened, was that last night Annie Whipple was trying to commune with the spirits. a rogue spirit had intercepted her message. Maybe the first 2 nights it really was Dr. Anderson trying to help her, but the third night a rogue spirit intercepted her message and did something to kind of teach her a lesson. You know, you're not supposed to dabble in the black arts. And they think that Annie Whipple forfeited her life for the life of the little girl. And people who knew Annie Whipple said she probably would have gladly done that. So there is kind of a happy ending. The little girl did survive, but the spooky part is they say her ghost is still there today, traipsing up and down the stairs. And people who stay at the bed and breakfast have seen her frequently. So if you're looking for a haunted bed and breakfast in Old Louisville, it's at the corner of Park and 4th Street, the Louisville Bourbon Inn. Okay? So how are we doing on time? Do I got time for another one? Give me a second. Let me see what I got. Yeah, I think I got time for another story. So what I'll do is I'll tell you about the witch's tree. This is the tree where Annie Whipple went to meet Josephine. And if you go there today, the corner of 6th and Park in Old Louisville, it's a gnarled and twisted tree. It's actually an old Osage orange tree. It's covered in burls, has dead branches, it's craggy, it's really spooky looking. And according to legend, like I said, it's where the Louisville Witches used to meet. So back in the day, there was a tall, beautiful maple tree that used to stand at that corner. And every night, a coven of witches would meet under its branches, and there they cast their spells, they brew their potions, they do the things that witches do. And went on that way for many, many years. But in 1889, that's when things were kind of interrupted. In 1889, the city of Louisville announced their plans to chop down the lovely tree because they wanted to use it for the next year's May Day celebrations. And if you know anything about May Day, May 1st, we don't celebrate it like they used to. In Victorian times, though, May 1st was a huge cause for celebration. And May 1st, back in the day, was like the unofficial welcome to spring. It was the end of cold. It was the welcome to the warm months finally at hand. And any people with Nordic or Midwestern heritage, what did you have to have at the centerpiece of any May Day activities? You had to have a maypole. And so the city planners had announced that they had destined the tree, the beautiful maple tree at the corner of 6th and Park, to be the next year's maypole. Well, of course, the Louisville Witches didn't like this. They warned the city not to steal their tree from them, and they said if they persisted, there'd be a terrible price to pay. But I guess back then, people didn't pay any attention to witches. A woodsman came, he chopped the tree down, it came crashing to the ground, and the Louisville Witches went shrieking off to the West End. And the West End back then had forest yet. There were trees, so the witches went, they found a new maple tree where they could hide out, but before they left, the head witch turned around and she cursed the city, and her final words were, "Beware, Louisville, beware, 11th month." But no one took the witches seriously. May 1st came, they danced around the maypole. Afterwards, they chopped it up into logs, burnt them in a big Whitsuntide bonfire, as was custom, and people promptly forgot about the witches. They promptly forgot about their warning. That is, until exactly 11 months later. It was March 27th, 1890. It was the day the witches took their revenge, and it came in the form of a huge tornado that came barreling out of the witches' forest in the West End. And it came into town all along Maple Street. I guess it was kind of a reminder of why they were doing this. And the tornado entered town, and it destroyed much of what was known as Louisville back then. The whole area along the river, tobacco warehouses, bourbon warehouses, the main hospital, the main train station, schools, temples, churches were all flattened. They say within 4 minutes, hundreds of homes and mansions were blown to bits. More than 120 people were killed. And of those people killed, a good number belonged to something known as the May Day Celebration Committee. So the people who chopped down the witches' tree, they say. And I guess the witches got their revenge. They say as the tornado roared out of town, and this was a tornado that even today they say ranks in like the top 50 deadliest tornadoes in American history. They said this tornado was so big it actually looked like a small hurricane as it came into town. For weeks after, the whole country was looking at Louisville and how they were faring. Daily updates were given in the New York Times. They think, for the scale that we're familiar with today, it would have been an F5 tornado back then. But in any case, once it was done ravishing the city, it roared out of town, it went south, and for a time it was on 6th Street. As it roared out of town on 6th Street, when it came to the spot where the maple tree had stood, they said the tornado kind of stopped, and a bolt of lightning shot out from their tornado. It hit the stump of the old tree, and there was a huge explosion. And the tree that we see there today sprang up from the earth in a shower of sparks and flame and smoke to replace the tree stolen from the witches. And like I said, it's not a perfectly straight tree. It's not majestic as it used to be. It's gnarled and twisted, kind of decrepit, but it's very spooky looking. And they say when it comes to witches, spooky's always better. And since then, the witches have returned to the corner of 6th and Park. And many nights you'll find them there at the corner, under its branches, casting their spells, brewing their potions, and doing the things that witches do. And it's become something of a tourist attraction today. If you go to the corner of 6th and Park, you'll see that people leave trinkets on the tree. And the branches of the bushes nearby, you'll see Mardi Gras beads, kind of hearkening to the Voodoo traditions there. A lot of times you'll see horse or equine related souvenirs, horseshoes, for example. They say if you go to the tree and leave something horse related, the witches help you when you go bed at Churchill Downs, when you bet on the horses. There's candles and pumpkins and angels. People stop there to kind of leave things to make amends to the witches, to kind of promise the witches that they're not going to take their tree from them anymore. So if you get a chance, if you're in the area, check out the beautiful witches tree at the corner of 7th and Main. And I'm trying to see if I got a picture of the witches tree in my book to kind of close things down. Yeah, it's hard to get a good picture, but that's what the surface of the tree looks like. I was just there a couple days ago. There were chicken bones in different formations. There was, someone had left all kinds of pentagrams made out of branches, bound together with yarn. There are a couple angels I saw up in the branches. There's still a couple horseshoes. The thing is, there's a neighborhood do-gooder who doesn't like people leaving things for witches on the tree, and every couple weeks he comes with his wheelbarrow and a big plastic white pail, and he takes all the things off the tree and he throws them away. And it's not something I'd advise people to do, because the witches, I hear, have their own Facebook page. You can check in at the Witches Tree on Facebook and at Instagram. And when people steal things from the witches, they put curses on them. So if you go to the Facebook page, the Witches Tree, if you go to Instagram, the Witches Tree, you can see curses that have been levied on people. They're kind of equal opportunity witches, though. When people leave things for them, a lot of times they'll give them good luck spells and incantations. So it's a really neat thing in Old Louisville. So thanks for hanging out with me tonight. I think we're going to be in this for a while, so maybe in another couple nights I'll get back with you and share another story. I think the next story will probably be about the house where I used to live, the Widmer house. And grab your bourbon and come and hear some of the stories about Old Louisville. So thanks for coming out tonight, and it was good seeing you all. And spread the word about Old Louisville. If you're not in this area, come see us. We love showing off the neighborhood. People in Louisville are very friendly, and I'm originally an out-of-towner, but now I've been here over 20 years. This is my hometown. I love it, and I love telling the stories about this neighborhood, and we got lots of stories. So stay tuned, and we'll see you the next time we talk about the ghostly past in Old Louisville, America's most haunted neighborhood. All right? Good seeing you all. Take care. Bye-bye.